Welcome to needlepointers.com's tutorial on how to sew binding to a quilt or quilt project. First, let me explain there are various methods of attaching binding to a quilt. The method I will show you today requires machine and hand sewing. Sewing binding to a quilt is a three-step process. The first step is to sew the binding to the edge of the quilt. The second step is to fold the binding over around the edge of the quilt, and the third step is to tack it down. Let's get started with one of my favorite methods. I am going to show you how to attach the binding to this small mug rug quilt, but the process is the same for any quilt, big or small. Also, if you would like to make this pumpkin mug rug, you will find a link in the video and description section. The first thing you need to do is make double fold binding. Need a tutorial on how to make double fold binding? Click on the tutorial link again in the video and the description section. How much double fold binding do you need? The length of the double fold binding strip should go all the way around the quilt project plus an additional 12 to 20 inches. I recommend starting the binding on either the side or bottom of the quilt, not the top. Take a few minutes to quickly run the binding around the perimeter of the quilt to make sure that you don't end up with a binding seam at the quilt corners. So for this, I'm going to show you, I'm going to quickly just go like this around it. And here I have a seam so it won't be in the corner. Again, quickly go around it. And I have another seam here, so they will not be in the corner. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a pin where I'd like to start sewing it. And since you need to leave a tail when you're doing this, I am going to put another pin where I want to start the binding so it does not end up in the corner. With the right side of the quilt facing up, align the binding along the raw edge at least 6 to 12 inches away from the corner. If you have a larger quilt, it can be further away. The folded edge of the binding is facing toward the middle of the quilt. Start stitching using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, as you see, I have the pins here. This is where I wanted to start. I'm going to remove the pins because you should not sew over them and begin stitching using, as I said, a 1/4 inch seam. I'm also going to back stitch just a little at the beginning and begin sewing. As you approach the corner, you're going to stop, I'm getting close to the corner, with the needle down 1/4 inch away from the corner. Now I'm using a quilting presser foot, so it has little markings here that show me the 1/4 inch. If you don't have one of those, you could place a pin, measure it a 1/4 inch and put a pin. But I'm going to do, okay, needle down, raise the presser foot and rotate the quilt, and you're going to be sewing directly into the corner. We're going to be mitering this corner, and this is an easy way to do it. Back tack, Now remove the project from the sewing machine. Clip the ends. Now what you're going to do is you're going to fold this back on a 45-degree angle. Then you're going to fold the working binding strip back on itself, matching the top. And of course aligning it on also the side. I'm going to place a pin just to make sure it doesn't move. Put your work back under the presser foot, starting at the end. You're going to go forward and then back, and then start stitching again forward using a 1/4 inch seam. As you get near the other corner of the quilt, the next corner, you're going to do the same thing. And I think I will show you again how to do it. Again, I'm approaching the corner. Here it is, and I want to stop a 1/4 inch away from it with my needle down, pivot, and stitch into the corner. I like to back stitch just a little to make sure it's secure. Then remove the quilt project from your sewing machine. Fold the binding back on itself, or fold the binding back first to have a 45-degree angle, then fold it back on itself. Making sure that the top aligns with the edge, the folded top of the binding aligns with the edge. I like to again place a pin just to hold it in place. And again, begin sewing from the edge. And back stitch and sew along the edge. Now I'm going to continue to do this on each of the corners, and then I'll show you the next step. Continue sewing until you are back where you started the binding. Leave at least an 8 to 10 inch gap between where you began and where you ended. Don't forget to backstitch. Now I didn't have room for an 8 to 10 inch. Mine's a little smaller and it'll be a little more difficult to sew the two ends together, but you will get the idea. There are multiple ways to connect the binding ends. This way is one of the simplest. What you want to do is fold the binding to approximately the middle of your gap. Fold the one end. Fold the other end in also so that they meet. Then iron them. After you press them, you're going to have a crease. I hope that you can see it, but there's a little crease along here. What we're going to do is we're going to line up this crease with the two creases together. I'm going to then pin them in place and then sew along the crease line. Here you can see that I have them pinned together, okay? And I forgot to mention, of course, you want to pin them with their right sides together. Now I'm going to sew along the crease. Before sewing this portion of the binding to the quilt, make sure that the binding strip is the right size by checking to see if it lays on the quilt properly and is the right length. And as you can see, I feel mine is correct. So now I'm going to trim the seam about 1/4 of an inch away. I am going to just finger press it open, fold it, and now I'm going to complete sewing the gap in there. Now we're going to press and fold the binding to the back of the quilt. All right, and all you need to do is just fold it over, and you can pin or you can use clips to hold it in place. Now when you get to the corner, you're going to just fold it over and then fold it down to make a mitered corner. Continue to do that all the way around your quilt project. This type of binding can be used, as I said, on quilts, can be used on pot holders, it can be used on placemats, wall hangings, any type of quilting project that you have. Okay, I'm going to continue to do this, and I'm going to show you the next step. To hand sew the binding to the back of the quilt, thread a double threaded needle. What that is 2 threads. What you do is you put the thread through the needle, you put the ends together, and then tie a knot. I like to use a double threaded needle because I feel it's stronger. Then bring the needle up from the back and right near the fold, then put the needle, that was into the binding, then put the needle into the backing of the quilt and go through it, not coming through to the front, just go through the backing and the batting about 1/4 of an inch. Where the needle came out, then go across to the binding, put the needle in and tunnel through the fold about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch. You could have done the first one even 1/2 an inch. Pull it through and continue to sew in that fashion all the way around your quilt or quilt project. I'm going to continue to finish up and sew all the way around. I am finished hand stitching the binding to the back of the quilt. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial on how to attach a binding to a quilt or quilt project, and I hope that you use this method. Please like, share, and comment. Subscribe to our channel and follow us on Facebook, Pinterest, and Twitter. To follow us, just click the link in the video or in the description. Also, don't forget to visit our website, needlepointers.com, for lots of free quilting projects and tutorials.